right. We're going to get started today talking about climate change, climate impacts, climate solutions, and how we move from what can seem very scary to education that's available to students, to schools, to districts, so they feel empowered to use their voice to make change. And so I'll start with myself. I'm Jennifer Hammonds. I am the Director of Education at the National Wildlife Federation. Joined by my colleagues who will each introduce themselves. I'll pass it to Liz.
Thanks, Jennifer. So yes, my name is Liz Soper. I'm the Senior Director of Education at NWF, and really excited about this webinar today, and hope that you all learn a lot and engage in this work, but that is so important. So I'm going to pass it on to Shannon.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shannon Hike-Williams, Associate Vice President of Climate and Energy at National Wildlife Federation, based out of the DC area. I'm very glad to be with you today. Sarah?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Calgren. I'm the Industrial Decarbonization Coordinator here at the National Wildlife Federation, also based in the DC area, and it's great to be with you.
You're muted.
Thank you. If you have questions, please place those in the Q&A that you find across the toolbar at the bottom. And we will have a period at the end of our presentation today to answer those questions, whether it's related to education or climate, space solutions and impacts. So I'm going to hand it over to Shannon and Sarah, who will be presenting first.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and share screen. We've got a few slides to share. Let's see here. Everyone seeing that so far?
Yep.
See. Okay, nodding. Now I just got to hit play. Okay. All right. Well, as we already and we're part of the climate and energy team, Shannon and Sarah, at National Wildlife Federation. Sorry about that button. And we cover a range of different, mainly federal policy advocacy sort of areas, but generally in the realm of climate mitigation, you might hear it called, or climate change solutions, whether it comes to renewable energy or nature-based solutions. There's a whole range of things that we work on and try and stay on top of. And we'll go into some of that today in our presentation, but hopefully not too much. Okay. All right. So first, for a little just primer, and you all are educators, so I'm sure you're very familiar with climate change. So I'm not going to go into all the mechanics of where it comes from and how it happens, but just as a brief refresh, obviously climate change is a serious and real problem that we're dealing with and seeing effects of now. And generally speaking, this is because human activity creates greenhouse gases, things like carbon dioxide, methane pollution, other things that go up into the atmosphere from various types of activities that combust fossil fuels. And those gases act like a blanket in a sense, and they form around the Earth and they trap in heat on the planet. And this over time increases the global average temperature. And it has been doing so, as you see from the graph here, since the Industrial Revolution, when we started using all these fossil fuels so rapidly and extensively. And it's more than the natural world, which of course, trees and other things can act like sinks or absorb absorb carbon dioxide, but it's more now than they can handle by themselves and naturally. So we have effects of this excess of carbon dioxide. It's more than the natural system can handle. And so now we have impacts, which we can get in. Sarah's going to talk about a little bit more for human health, wildlife, natural resources, you name it, increasing natural disasters, and costing us lots of money, economy-wise, but even in our own pocketbooks now, we're seeing the effects. And this is enough of a concern now that the world scientists have gotten together and urged all nations to swiftly limit future emissions of carbon dioxide and to try to keep global average temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius above what it was before the Industrial Revolution. That might not sound like much, 2 degrees, what can that mean? But of course, it's Celsius is one thing, and it's worse when you think of Fahrenheit. But also, that's just an average. And so you have more warming in the poles, and then you also get kind of disruption of systems and more extreme events and things happening at the same time. Translating that 2-degree limit is about a goal in terms of emissions, a net zero greenhouse gas emission policy worldwide by mid-century. So that means on average, the world should level out, and not emit more than it can absorb in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Mid-century sounded like a long time ago when I first started working on climate change. But that's actually 25 years from now, which is just like mind-blowing. But there are signs of hope, and I'll get into that much more. It's not all going to be gloom and doom. One final thought, though, on the kind of where we are on climate change is 2 degrees is now considered probably a little bit too risky by the world scientists, since we're already seeing so much warming and effects of the warming. So they really have encouraged nations to try to aim for 1.5 degree limit Celsius. And the reason why I mentioned that is that recent estimates are that we're already at about a 1.2 degrees Celsius level of warming. So clearly we need to act decisively and quickly, and all of us together, as well as, of course, at the national and global levels. All right. Now I'm going to turn to Sarah, who can talk a little bit about what this means in terms of what we experience in impacts.
Perfect. Thanks, Shannon. So echoing what Shannon just said, this presentation will not all be doom and gloom, but we do need to start with a little bit of setting the stage. So climate change is a multidimensional problem, and its impacts are just as widespread. We have increasing temperatures that pose threats for humans as well as other terrestrial and marine ecosystems. There's also erratic rain patterns that can lead to drought and increased wildfires, followed by heavy rainfall and flooding. And as we've recently seen in Florida and the Carolinas, really severe storms that on the climate team here at NWF, we started referring to as unnatural disasters. And we actually have 2 story maps, one on unnatural disasters and one on extreme heat that Liz and Jennifer will be diving into later in the presentation. So I think the really tricky thing about impacts from climate change is that you have this initial climate related disaster or some distinct event like a heat wave, and you have these very localized impacts, some things like heat related illnesses, stress on water supply, stress on conservation or crop yields, and then you have these kind of rippling sets of impacts that spread across a region and continue to impact people and the planet over time, especially as other climate related events keep occurring. And these types of consequences have long-term impacts to infrastructure. They fuel climate, fuel migration, and also having cumulative impacts on economic and health systems, like in globally. And so whether you're near these events or not, they lead very reasonably to a sense of worry and anxiety around our changing climate. Next slide. So all of this uncertainty and change has the potential to cause a sense of alarm for both kids and adults. I think worry and anxiety around the changing climate is normal, and sometimes I think in moderation it can help motivate people to make change in their communities. I think in a glass half full sense, it also kind of shows this deep level of care and empathy for those experiencing the impacts of climate change and also for the world around you. But these types of complicated feelings towards the climate crisis ideally should be balanced with healthy coping mechanisms. And if these feelings start to become all-consuming and prevent kids or adults from going about their day-to-day lives in a functional way, then this is a situation where a child or adult should seek outside help to get back to a healthier place with thinking about these really tough topics. So I think now that climate change is becoming more widely accepted, perhaps not everywhere, but for a lot more places than perhaps 10 or 15 years ago, I think conversations around the fear and stress surrounding the climate crisis are happening more, I would imagine, in schools. And I'm going to talk about just some strategies that our team has found helpful when talking to our audiences about the fears around climate change. So the first one is that, unfortunately, while there is no perfect solution that will solve the climate crisis, there are lots and lots of small imperfect solutions that are happening already to address these problems. Also, kind of along these same lines, every solution that we implement, small or big, lessens the severity of climate change. And I think it's really easy to fall into this type of binary thinking where we either are thinking, okay, we're going to solve climate change and everything's going to be great, or we're not going to solve it and everything's going to be really awful and scary. And there's a lot of middle ground in that equation that I think needs to be remembered, and every action that we take makes the planet a safer place for everybody on it. Additionally, I think the impacts of climate change are broad and they have a tendency to reveal the systemic inequalities and injustices in the world. And I certainly find myself thinking about those things, and I imagine other young people are as well. And I think when it comes to tackling these injustices, no one is too young to help get involved. And I hope that young people can get inspired by all of the amazing youth advocates and organizers out there, and also feel empowered to make change in their communities where they can. I think feeling a sense of empowerment to make change where you are can really combat the feelings of like helplessness that are becoming more common when thinking about the climate. And then finally, I think a lot of young people worry that their leaders aren't doing enough to solve climate change. And while we did wait too long to start to address the impacts of climate change, countries, including the US, have started to make huge investments in addressing these challenges. So I will kick it over to Shannon, and she can tell you about some of the recent federal investments in the climate space in the US.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sarah. Okay. So you all may have heard of these, but there's reason, real reason for optimism when it comes to US policy on climate change, if you can believe it. It's taken me a while to think that, but in the last couple of years alone, we've passed two major pieces of legislation signed into law. One is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the other is the Inflation Reduction Act. And together, these two bills represent the largest contribution to acting on climate change in US history. So it's really, while we don't have yet, let's say an economy-wide price on carbon, that makes all polluters have to pay a certain fee for emitting pollution, or a mandate of a certain amount of renewable energy that is to be produced, in every state in the country. We do have these other new pieces of legislation that are actually driving real change in the market, in the economy, and in our lives, and in communities all across the country. So, really briefly, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law basically was a bill that is focused primarily on funneling money through research and development to developing new solutions, largely to climate change, or as part of the new clean energy economy, and also to direct grants and loans to communities and other entities to adopt these types of solutions. And there's also a lot in there, frankly, on natural resources restoration, and also nature-based solutions to climate change, like making sure that forests are healthy in order to be able to be more wildfire resilient and to be able to continue absorbing more carbon dioxide. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. And then the Inflation Reduction Act is a little bit of sort of a almost like a sibling, I guess you could say, where the first bill, really focused on direct funding of different beneficial projects. The second one is a tax bill. So it provides a lot of incentives through tax credits and other sorts of mechanisms to really speed the deployment or the adoption of the technologies that have already been more or less researched, I guess you could say, and ready to go, but need an extra boost to be adopted and used more quickly than the current market is really calling for or allowing otherwise. And that's in all kinds of areas. It's in clean energy, it's in resilience and agriculture, and conservation projects. So it's a great complement, and it also puts tens of billions of dollars into these kinds of solutions. And also definitely worth mentioning is that both bills have special attention to the environmental justice and climate justice aspects of climate solutions, to ensure that these communities that are on the front lines of climate change are prioritized for investment of different kinds. And same thing goes also, especially in the Inflation Reduction Act, for what we call energy communities, or communities that have been traditionally fossil fuel dependent, like coal mining towns and the like, and to make sure that investments are really prioritized there too, to help communities and workers transition to this new economy. Okay, so just a teeny bit more on what some of the specific types of investments might look like. especially in the, well, for both bills, but especially the Inflation Reduction Act. These projects include offshore wind, which is something that we work on a lot, and we have good resources on our website about at NWF. Onshore wind and solar installations, whether it be large scale or utility scale solar farms, or whether it be residential rooftop solar or community-based solar, where you have shared solar in different communities. EV charging stations. It's no good if people get a tax credit to help them buy an EV if there's no charging stations around. So the bills have really worked hard to make sure the communities have extra support to install these charging stations. Clean energy manufacturing facilities, incentivizing those to get built so that we can try to make more of the solar panels and more of the different components of clean energy products in the US. Instead of being really reliant on other countries for those products. And then worker training. There's a lot in here about apprenticeships and labor standards to make sure that different people are included and have opportunity both to grow businesses as well as get training in this new clean energy economy. So that's all very encouraging and historic. And since then, since the passage of these bills, tens of thousands of jobs have been created. I believe it's probably at least 80,000 jobs have been created since then. 300 major new clean energy projects have broken ground and been launched, and dozens of new clean energy manufacturing facilities have also opened. So it's really the beginning of what seems to me like a supercharged clean energy race. A lot of that was somewhat on the way already just by market demand and the fact that solar and wind is now cost competitive with natural gas, which is very exciting. We had been waiting for that for a long time, but this really helps supercharge it. And so this goes back. This helps us feel more confident that we have a chance of actually meeting those goals that I mentioned earlier of a 40% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030, and then if you pair some regulatory things on top of that, which the administration's doing, close to 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And then just for a tad bit more on kind of the impact of all of this, in 2022, so not taking into account all of these investments, we were already at 20%. Maybe that sounds low, but to me, that's very encouraging, of US energy generated by renewable energy now, renewable sources. So things like wind and solar, geothermal energy, hydropower. And that's really an impressive increase. And coal is pretty much on the way out. Natural gas is still hanging in there, but at least we have cost competitiveness now, and with these incentives, increasingly towns across the country and utilities will be making the choice to switch to renewables. All right, let's see. Oh, and then the other point I just wanted to make clear is that this is part of a larger strategy at the White House level to make sure that all of our electricity sector is carbon pollution free by 2035. So they're really trying to move fast. And then for visual people like me, this is what that looks like on a graph. Just in case that helps you see the rapid rise, which the last 10 years, especially in renewables, but the last 5 even, is just exponential growth, and it's just going to continue. All right, so now I will pass it back to Sarah, who has some additional thoughts about the industrial sector, where she specializes, and also some closing thoughts and recommendations. Sarah.
Perfect. Thanks, Shannon. So as we just heard, renewable energy uptake has been exploding in the US over the past 10 years, which is huge for our decarbonization goals, right? However, there are industries that are particularly difficult to decarbonize, even with electrification. So these include industries like cement and steel in particular, and then some certain chemicals as well. This challenges for a few reasons, including the high levels of heat that are required to create these materials that renewable energy sources are just unable to provide right now, as well as emissions that are inherent based on the chemical processes used to manufacture steel and cement. This is a real world challenge, since if you look around, you will absolutely be able to see something made of steel or cement somewhere in your neighborhood. They're very, very ubiquitous materials in the world. So there are a few potential solutions to this challenge, including electrification where possible in order to increase industrial efficiencies, as well as using new fuels like hydrogen to power heavy industry and long haul transportation. However, hydrogen is a complicated solution because while it is the most abundant element in the universe, and when it's consumed in a fuel cell, it creates only water vapor as its byproduct. It has its own challenges, like how to isolate it, since it's usually bound up in other compounds such as water. And the process of separating hydrogen from oxygen in water can be powered with clean energy. But it does require quite a bit of energy to do so. And there's already quite a bit of competition to be able to use the clean energy that we generate as is. And more often in the US, the hydrogen reforming process is powered by natural gas, which has its own carbon footprint, thus impacting how clean of a fuel hydrogen actually is. If you're more interested in this, the Department of Energy has like a whole color scale on how they differentiate the different ways that hydrogen is created. It's very interesting, albeit a little complex. So I won't get in too deep here on that. But additionally, the Department of Energy has invested billions of dollars into carbon management strategies such as direct air capture and carbon capture. These technologies work to remove CO2 at either the point source, so think of like adding technology to filter out CO2 and other pollutants from a smokestack on an actual like polluting facility, versus direct air capture, which is just a type of kind of like a big vacuum that reduces CO2 emissions that are lingering in the atmosphere from historical emissions. And these are simply a few of the technical strategies that paired along with lots of other solutions, including nature-based solutions, think like restorative agriculture, proper forestry management, afforestation, reforestation, all that stuff, that when working together can help address the climate crisis, right? As with any strategy for addressing the climate change, it's really paramount to consider the impacts of these strategies on people and wildlife and limit the burdens where possible on communities who have already been burdened by the climate crisis. Next slide. Yep, there we go. Now we're going to talk about the different challenges that these different climate solutions raise. The first broad one is the challenge of land use. There's a lot of competition for land use between siting renewables, land for agriculture, as well as land set aside for conservation. And all of these land uses are really important and necessary to create a thriving planet, and finding a balance between how to allocate these different land uses has been very challenging. Additionally, with all of our new clean energy creation, we need to grow our transmission network in the United States to bring this new clean energy to communities that need it. And building new transmission lines also has impacts both on communities and wildlife. And then finally, with the rise of electrification technologies, like electric vehicles, there's also an increased need for critical minerals. So things like lithium that like make the batteries in an electric vehicle, and then also other goods in the supply chain that are difficult to source ethically, both domestically and abroad. So writ large, all of these, there's no impactless climate solution, right? And there's going to be no one perfect solution. Building any new solution, specifically when it has like new infrastructure involved, is disruptive. But it's also really necessary in order to address the challenges that the climate crisis presents, and is ultimately going to be the better option in the long run for our planet than the continuation of fossil fuels. And next slide. And then I won't linger too long on this slide because we're just at time, but given all the solutions that we've talked about thus far and the challenges they present, it's really important to note that a lot of these technologies and solutions are adapting and changing every day, and that's a really good thing, because we unfortunately don't have the luxury of time to wait and find the most perfect solution to address climate change. And as we've kind of been saying this whole presentation, we have a suite of imperfect solutions that ideally, when operated together, can fill each other's shortcomings. I like to think of like the Swiss cheese example where each solution has holes in it, but ideally when you put them all together into one big block, they're able to be more cohesive and cover each other's shortcomings. And as I said, there are no impactless solutions, and we need to be thoughtful about the costs and benefits of each of the solutions at our disposal, while also remembering that inaction has the biggest cost of all. So all that said, thank you so much for your attention, and I'm not sure if we're taking questions now or after Jen and Liz's presentation, but either works. Thank you.
Yeah, we can do it at the end. So we'll go ahead and move on, to your last bullet point, that education is a solution. So we'll use that as a segue into this next piece about EcoSchools, which is one of our education programs here at the National Wildlife Federation. And I will pass it over to Liz, and I will share my screen.
Thanks, Jennifer and Sarah and Shannon for that great information. I think as as we heard, that we definitely have the scientific and technical knowledge that we need to solve climate change. But what we need is really to enhance and move the needle on the social and political will. Really to continue to address climate change at the scale and with the urgency required. And I think this is really where climate change education comes in. Jennifer and I will be speaking over the next few minutes here about how NWF has begun to really work in unison with this fabulous climate team and the work that we're doing to help schools and students and communities address the challenges associated with climate change. So EcoSchools US is one of our major sustainability education programs that NWF runs. And I just want to talk briefly about it for those of you who may not know much around it. It is not our own program. We are the host for EcoSchools here in the United States and is actually run by the Foundation of Environmental Education. Based out of Denmark. There's close to, I believe, 1,000 countries across the world now that are engaged.
100. Just over 100.
Wow, one less zero there, 100. That would be, yeah, okay, sorry. Sorry about that. That are engaged in EcoSchools. So it truly is a very large education for sustainability global program. We started the program in 2009. We've been engaged for over 15 years with this program with about 7,000 schools. And this program really is student-driven, student-led. We work to work with schools and these students and communities by targeting different sustainability issues at the schools as well as in the communities themselves. Not only to work on sustainability, but to also utilize these programs to be able to enhance academic learning, especially around the STEM disciplines, and embed environmental values into school cultures and the communities. So next slide. So we talk about EcoSchools as our tagline, as a sustainable future begins at every school. We believe every school can be engaged in this program and can really do this incredibly important work. So again, there's 19 million young environmental leaders with those 100 different countries that are engaged in it. Some of this I did just cover, but you can see here just getting involved with this US EcoSchools US program, what students can engage in and involve in. Jennifer, next slide. So as well, when we work with schools, we're really trying to build that student environmental leadership and capacity with the staff and their communities. We are really working on helping to think about how to enhance and engage students, especially in what we call green STEAM, which is using environment-based education to learn the STEM disciplines, and to also think about green careers, which is really important. And I believe Shannon spoke to that as well. You know, trying to improve the operational efficiency of school buildings, making them more sustainable, helping to save money. That resonates a lot with school districts, and as well to connect to the local community partners and resources. We try to break down the walls of the schools and bring people in to the school and have the students go out into the community and really be place-based about the work that they're doing as they implement their actions and projects. And it is as well a certification-based program, and so we recognize this with the work that the schools do, and it allows the schools to see the collective impact that they have within their own school and within as well the state, the country, and globally. And again, it is based on the US Sustainable or the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are really important. So Jennifer, I think I'm handing it over to you now. Oh, no.
One more.
Sorry about that. So the EcoSchools program on a global level is built on the 7-step framework, which is one of the foundational elements of EcoSchools. So you can see here, there's 7 main steps that students in schools go through as they address a specific sustainability issue. And I'm not going to go through what those 7 steps are, but it's really working within the school to work collectively, to assess the problem, to come up with actions, to incorporate it into the curriculum, and to ensure that the community is very much involved. With our EcoSchools US program here, we re-envisioned the program over a year ago and began thinking about how best to connect it with a lot of what we're doing as an organization on the whole. And so our program is really built on 3 main themes, including work around climate, work around wildlife and biodiversity, and as well as healthy and resilient communities. So those 2 key things are our foundational elements for EcoSchools.
Great, thanks. All right, so now when schools or districts join EcoSchools, they register and they come to our website. So I'm going to get off of this. We're going to go into the ECA. Give me just a moment. All right, so everyone, every school or district that participates, they have a dashboard. In this dashboard, everyone has an action plan and everyone has access to the action library. This library is filled with over 50 different cards that are very intersectional. So we might identify them as primarily wildlife and biodiversity, or primarily healthy and resilient communities, or climate change, but they're very intersectional. We can't talk about one without talking about another theme. I'm going to speak specifically to some work that our climate team did that was the inspiration for one of these for 2 of the action cards I'm going to share today. So I'm going to pop out of our ECA, the EcoSchool Certification Application, and share the inspiration for the educational work that was developed. So National Wildlife Federation, our climate team, developed 2 story maps that Sarah shared with us: unnatural disasters and the rise of extreme heat. And so in our unnatural disasters piece, we talk about hurricanes, wildfires, heat and drought, floods, toxic algae, how to get involved, and then it also has this work in Spanish. One thing from an education perspective, I was a classroom science teacher for 15 years before coming to NWF for the last 15 years, is the use of different types of visual information to not only tell a story, but to provide a variety of different learning opportunities to students. And so I really looked at this information, having short tidbits to read, and then it uses, the visual elements of photographs, graphs, charts, ways for students to explore more about what is happening as far as disasters are concerned, or the rise of extreme heat where they lived. So I'll spend just a minute on the rise of extreme heat. Again, another inspiration to develop content for schools to participate in. This one focuses on climate change fueling extreme heat, the public health hazards, inequities, forced displacement solutions, and again, available in Spanish. So I took these, and with the education team, we developed an action card, 2 action cards, 1 for each map. And I'm going to take this out of the library and add it to my plan. So I'm going to click the plus button here. It disappears from the library. Now I'm going to go over to our plan, and I see that it exists here, and I can open it up. So as a teacher, this lets me know this is what the map is about. I have curriculum connections. So what are other ways I could work with my colleagues to ask them to support my goals around this science? There's a lot of social studies related to this, art that can be done, a lot of math concepts that can be taught through this the story maps. And then, of course, the connections to the Sustainable Development Goals. While we know that teachers are masters of their practice and they may have all the resources that they need, we do provide an action guide that sets them up for the most success possible. From there, we also provide resources. So this will have the link to the story maps, links to partners or other like-minded organizations, things that we at NWF have developed, and things that have been developed outside of the National Wildlife Federation that we find valuable and may be helpful to the learning experience. And then the way Liz talked about how it is also a certification program. The way schools get certified is by answering different questions. These at the top are specifically connected to the story maps that I was referencing just a moment ago. And as questions are answered, schools are receiving points. So I'm going to pop out of this for just a moment. I'm going to go back to our presentation. And like I said, Liz was sharing that we have 3 different themes. These are just some of the cards that represent the climate change action cards that are available. There are others. And as a reminder, whether you're working in your community or you're working on wildlife and biodiversity issues, climate intersects all the work that's being done. I'm going to say this again in just a second. There's collective impact. So again, going back to those questions that are answered and points that are being tabulated on the back end, it's also going into these impact tiles where we can see how many students are participating, look at native habitat that's being developed, look at energy conservation actions or water conservation actions that are put into place. And you'll see that of the 9 tiles we currently have, there's not one for climate. And that's because we feel very strongly that all the actions that students, district schools are doing really are having an impact in some way, small or large, on the climate in their community and improving those health outcomes for future generations.
Hey, Jennifer, can you make that into a full presentation?
Yes, I can. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Is that better?
Yes, it is. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Bad eyes. Yep.
All right. So from here, we looked at the action cards, told you about points that can be received by asking questions, how those questions roll into these national, state, and local impacts. That's a great thing about this new platform is we can see what does the impact look like in my school district? What does the impact look like for my students at my school? We can also look at the state or the nation. There are 4 certification levels, bronze, silver, gold, and our ultimate recognition is the green flag. You can see the point values there. And schools strive for these recognitions on an annual basis. So it's not like you receive the green flag one time and you have it forever. You've got to renew that commitment on an annual basis to participate in EcoSchools. All right, and as we wind down, want to provide this little bit of recent research on the role of climate change education on individual lifetime carbon emissions. So yet education could play a crucial mitigation role by empowering climate literate citizens who support sustainable policies and careers. And research has shown that scaling up climate education could reduce carbon emissions comparably to large-scale interventions like electric vehicles and rooftop solar. And for those of you who may not know, I believe the time is less than 2 hours a year is spent teaching climate change, climate solutions, climate impacts. And so we have a lot to do in this space. Youth are amazing at advocating for these changes. And it's just providing them with the right tools, the right leaders, the right avenues for them to have their voice heard. I'll be sharing all this information. It'll either come from Sarah or I, or maybe from Zoom. I don't remember how it actually comes back to you, but we will share all presentations. You'll have access to these resources. And I do want to get out of this again and back in just a moment. There is an upcoming webinar specific to the idea of dealing with climate worry and anxiety, really to help children and adults deal with the emotions related to climate change and to the things that are occurring in our nation. And so I'm going to post this in the chat. Give me just a moment. If you would like to register, it is taking place on, is it
Election day?
Yeah. On election day. So that's a stressful day in general. This may be a great time for you to really work on taking a deep breath and learning some tactics and ways to move forward with hope instead of sitting with a lot of stress and anxiety. All right, moving back here. All right, all that to say thank you. There are a couple of questions that have come through, and so I want to take a moment to ask. I've got a couple that's for the climate team. Let me hop out of all of this stuff. Okay. So the first one was brought up by NWF has a youth advisory board. And so why hasn't more been done to fight climate change?
Sure, I can give this a start. Sarah, feel free to jump in. That is something that it's a great question, and I certainly think about that a lot. I think that maybe if I could tweak that a bit, I might say that why hasn't anything been done earlier to fight climate change? Because I think we are doing a lot now. It should have been earlier is part of the problem, and that's why we're seeing the impacts that we're seeing. So I think part of it is human nature. It's we are busy people, all of us, and we have lots of other stuff going on. This is just speaking from an American perspective, so let alone what might be going on in other parts of the world. And it's hard to prioritize something that feels long-term, complex, all the rest. So that's one thing. And also it's an environment school. When I got my master's, we talked about the global commons, right? I mean, this is like such a typical problem of the global commons, which is a shared atmosphere and that we're all contributing to in the form of pollution. And it's hard to see how my little contribution actually has an impact, whether it's negative or positive. So that just puts off action. But I think more to the point, though, because that would suggest that it's really sort of an individual's problem and responsibility, which I think isn't really fair and isn't really true totally about climate change. It's really a problem about systems and political will and broad policy gaps and inaction, I think, because the nature of the problem does require that higher level, broad scale sort of set of solutions. And then we have, again, speaking from an American perspective, the problem of politics and the time frame with which we need to address climate change, again, largely thinking in the long term, doesn't line up with political cycles. And so taking a really big step, I think, for some politicians to, let's say, dramatically change the way the local industry that's responsible for a lot of jobs in the congressman's district might not be top of that list, right? Especially if you got to get reelected a couple of years. So I think that's fundamentally a lot of the problem. And then meanwhile, our economy has been built on, for better and worse, fossil fuels, and there's a lot of inherent structures and interests and a lot of power that is really still embedded in that sector. It's becoming also very influential, the clean energy sector, but it's catching up to do. So it's a combination of all of those things, complex, a lot of evolving science still also, a lot to learn and a lot of different approaches to take that we all have to kind of act in concert on, would be kind of another aspect of that.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. And one more for you both. How do you tell the difference between a meaningful climate change solution and one that's greenwashed or overstated?
Yeah, I can start on that. I think they're unfortunately in an environment of change and upheaval and uncertainty. I think unfortunately there are opportunities for false solutions to be advertised and for those things to unfortunately prey upon people's fear or anxiety around the situation. And so something that I always think of is from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He always says, look to the helpers. And I always think of who are the helpers in this situation? Who are the experts? Who can we look to? Who would have a unbiased, very science-based opinion on where these things land. And I think looking to those experts, whether that be international governing bodies like the IPCC, the United Nations, academics, all those news sources that you feel are good and helpful and take an unbiased and kind of critical lens on these things. I think that's certainly how we on the climate team go about it. And I think thinking about where there are things to be gained and where there are things to be lost, depending on who is providing these types of solutions. That's how I certainly go about it. Shannon, feel free to add.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I'll just add that it is challenging. I mean, we do this for a living and we still feel like it's hard, especially in the social media era, you know, in a 24 news cycle or even shorter, I guess. There's so much information, and to expect your average person who's got a lot on their plate to have to navigate through flat out false information as well as factual information is really hard. And so it's not just you if you feel that way, but yes, go to your sources that you trust, especially peer review. Anything that might cite peer reviewed literature is still a good way to go. So, and government agency documents usually is also a good way to go. And then organizations like NWF that are, fact based and really try not to, we do have advocacy that we do, but it's always based on what the science calls for. So, recommend that.
Thank you. Here's a question that's in the chat. Super grateful for all the amazing things that you're doing. Thank you. My question is, I'm an AmeriCorps member who has recently been paired with a school district to support all schools in their sustainability efforts. I'm super excited, but I'd love to fully understand how to help them navigate the site, complete tasks properly, etc. Is there a tutorial somewhere so I can help our green team leads make the greatest impact? I can respond to that, or Liz, if you want to respond. What did you say? What did you say? Okay, all right. So I'm available to help with that. We have some tutorials, but they're answering very specific pointed questions. If you are a school district and you need support, please feel free to reach out to me. I can put our contact information back up, or we can each put them in the chat. That'll be available there. But yes, I can point you to some specific videos that have been made. But every district is unique and has specific goals that they're trying to achieve. And only you understand the ins and outs of your school district. And so really working one-on-one or in a small group is the best way forward. And so Liz put my email in the chat. And I also put the webinar in the chat. I think we've got that all fixed so that folks can register for that if you are interested. So I hope that answered your question about better understanding how to navigate the site. Let's see.
I would just add too that we do have a pretty detailed FAQ document as well as a guidebook associated with the process. And I just highly suggest folks take a really close look at that. And if they still have questions, again, both Jennifer or I are
Yes.
certainly willing to answer any questions folks have.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. We've got another one. Sarah, appreciate your response. We found that chasing down information sometimes leads to conflicting information. For example, investigating compostable single-use products.
Yeah, I think it's hard, right? I think that there are a lot of these things, like again, talking about like these kind of artificial like binaries that I think are kind of put on us about like this thing is good or this thing is bad. It's like nothing is, well, very few things are completely good or completely bad, right? Like, and I think that the chasing down precisely the information of how the, like, for example, those single-use compostable things, like there are so many ways to look at it, right? And there are different like theories of change of how you want to view the world and how you want to see things happen. So I completely empathize with you. And I think when I think back in my time in school classroom, and I think some of my most impactful memories of being a student were teachers who really leaned into that nuance and were like, there are things that are like finding these black and white things are difficult and like finding ways to navigate the gray. Because I think that is something that is just good. It's such an important life skill. And I think that's something that I certainly took away from my formative years and as a student.
Yeah. And leaning into the community aspect of eco schools. And my reference is always Sesame Street. Who are the people in your neighborhood? Who's doing this? So for older generations, you'll remember that. But who is already doing this work in your community? And who can you reach out to? Who are experts in your community who are doing this work that can help you decipher between fact and opinion and misinformation so that the school, the students can make the best, most informed decision. And like Sarah and Shannon are talking about, and it's science in general, science isn't static. Nothing's ever the same. When we learn new things, we do better. We try to improve upon the technology or our ideas to do better. So we make mistakes, obviously. But I would definitely lean into those community supports, finding those people who are experts in those fields to help make better informed decisions, especially as we really are moving into an AI era. It's going to be very important and much harder for students who already have a lot of difficulty deciphering between fact and opinion. So really building those relationships with community experts, I think it is critical. All right. Any other questions? I don't see anything in our Q&A. So I think that's it. Sarah and Shannon, why don't you put your email addresses so I don't have to share my screen again and go back to that. We will be sharing both our presentations. We'll share the link again to the webinar that's upcoming on the 5th of November. If you are a school or a district and have questions about participating, or you're already participating but still have questions, please feel free to reach out to Liz and I. If you have climate questions at the more macro level, please feel free to reach out to Shannon and Sarah. And we want to thank you for being here today.